Beneath the frost-kissed moon of Greystone, where shadows clawed at the edges of forgotten oaths, a single tear traced the curve of Caris Loon's cheek, like liquid silver, freezing before it could fall. The square of Greystone Pack sprawled like a wound in the heart of the mountain valley, its cobblestones slick with the night's reluctant thaw. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting jagged pools of orange light that danced mockingly over the gathered crowd. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine resin and damp earth, undercut by the metallic tang of anticipation. Blood not yet spilled, but hungering for it. Wind whispered through the encircling pines, carrying distant howls that echoed like judgments from the peaks. Caris stood at the center, her bare feet numb against the cold stone, her thin shift clinging to her skin like a shroud. 18 winters had etched fragility into her bones, but tonight they sought to shatter her entirely. The elders encircled her, their robes of gray wool stained with the mud of ritual paths, faces carved by years of unyielding doctrine. Elder Thorn, his voice a gravelly rumble that cut through the murmurs, stepped forward, his staff thudding against the ground like a heartbeat denied. Caris Loon, Omega of no worth, you have hidden your shame long enough. The pack demands proof. Shift. Show us the beast within, or prove yourself the defect we always knew. Laughter rippled through the throng, a wave of cruelty that pressed against her chest. Faces she had known since puphood twisted in scorn, the blacksmith's son who once shared bread with her in secret, now jeering with fists raised, the healer's daughter whose eyes gleamed with the thrill of another's fall. They had mocked her for years, the quiet girl who never sparked in the moon's call, whose body resisted the change as if cursed by the goddess herself, weak, defective, unworthy of the blood that bound them all. Whispers had grown to shouts, isolation to exile in all but name. Her family's hut on the outskirts had become a tomb of silence after her father's death, her mother's spirit broken by the pack's disdain. Now, this public trial, forced transformation under the open sky, where failure meant death by the elder's claws or the crowd's frenzy. Fear coiled in Caris's gut, a serpent of ice that locked her limbs. She clenched her fists, nails biting into palms, already scarred from futile attempts in hidden glades. The moon hung low, bloated and silver, its light bathing the square in a pallor that made every face ghostly. She felt its pull, faint as a lover's sigh, but her body rebelled. Sweat beaded on her brow despite the chill, mingling with the tear that had escaped earlier. "Please," she whispered, voice lost to the wind, "I can't, not like this." Thorn's eyes narrowed, cold as the steel at his belt. The goddess reveals truth in pain. If you are pack, shift. If not. He trailed off, gesturing to the guards flanking her, burly betas with chains in hand, ready to drag her to the pyre if she faltered. The crowd surged closer, their breaths a collective growl, the scent of their excitement thick and animal. A stone sailed from the shadows, grazing her shoulder, drawing a thin line of blood that welled warm against the cold. Pain bloomed, sharp and insistent, threading through her veins like fire-seeking tinder. She staggered, knees buckling as shame flooded her. Memories crashed in, the festivals where she watched others transform, their fur gleaming under lunar light while she remained trapped in skin. The Alpha's sons who circled her with leers, only to turn away in disgust. The endless nights alone, begging the moon for a sign that she was more than broken. The elders chanted now, low and rhythmic, invoking the ancient rites. By blood and bone, by fang and claw, reveal or perish. The pressure built, a storm within her chest, cracking the walls she had built around her spirit. Her vision blurred, the torchlight fracturing into golden shards. A gasp tore from her throat as agony ripped through her core. Not the familiar dull ache, but a searing blaze, as if the sun itself had ignited in her blood. She fell to her hands and knees, the cobblestones biting into her skin, and the world tilted. Fur, not the muted gray of common wolves, but a radiant gold, shimmering like molten dawn, erupted along her arms, her back arching in ecstatic torment. The crowd's jeers faltered into stunned silence as her body contorted, bones lengthening with a symphony of snaps and growls that echoed off the mountains. No ordinary shift, this. It was a birth, ancient and unbound, her form expanding into something majestic, ethereal. The golden wolf rose on the square's heart, taller than any alpha's beast, its coat ablaze with an inner light that defied the night. Eyes like polished amber swept the assembly, and a low, resonant rumble vibrated from its throat, not a threat, but a remembrance. Carrying the weight of forgotten prophecies whispered in the goddess's temples. From the shadowed dais at the square's edge, where the pack's rulers observed in stoic judgment, a figure moved. Alpha King Dorian Viel, sovereign of the northern realms at 45, his frame broad and scarred from battles long etched in lore, descended the steps without a word. His silver-streaked hair caught the moonlight, his eyes, deep wells of haunted blue, locked on the wolf with an intensity that stilled the air. Clad in a cloak of midnight fur over armor etched with runes of old oaths, he crossed the square in measured strides, the crowd parting like mist before a gale. He stopped before her, the golden wolf towering yet still, their breaths mingling in the frozen hush. Guilt shadowed his features, lines carved by years of crowns heavier than iron, decisions that had cost lives and souls. Dorian, who had united packs through blood and betrayal, who bore the mark of a curse from a war lost to whispers, felt it then, a pull older than his throne. Without thought, without the rigidity of kingship, he dropped to one knee, head bowing in reverence. The torch flames bowed with the wind, as if the night itself acknowledged the shift. In that single moment, humiliation shattered into revelation. Power was not the roar of dominance, but the quiet bloom of what had always been hidden, waiting under the moon's patient gaze. Caris, in her golden form, tilted her head, sensing the fracture in him as keenly as her own, and the square, once a stage of scorn, trembled on the edge of destiny. The wind howled through the pines like a dirge for the old ways, carrying the scent of pine sap and smoldering torches as Caris's golden form stood unmoving in the square's unforgiving heart. Her paws, broad and luminous against the frost-veined stone, pressed into the earth that had once sought to claim her as its failure. The crowd's silence stretched taut, a bowstring pulled to breaking, their breaths visible in the moon's chill embrace. She felt their stares like thorns, fear now laced with awe, the jeers curdled into whispers of heresy and omen. But beneath the wolf's radiant pelt, Caris trembled, her human mind a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. This power, this ancient surge that had clawed free from her depths, was no gift. It was a fracture, exposing the raw edges of a soul long hidden. Dorian Viel remained on one knee, his armored form a shadow etched in silver moonlight, the runes on his pauldrons glowing faintly as if stirred by the same ethereal fire that burned in her fur. At 45, he carried the weight of realms in the hollows of his cheeks, the silver threads in his dark hair a testament to nights spent wrestling ghosts of command. Guilt was his constant companion, a curse woven into his blood from the wars that had forged his crown, betrayals he had ordered, pacts shattered under his banner, a queen lost to the very ambitions that elevated him. He had come to Greystone not as savior, but as judge, drawn by rumors of unrest that threatened the fragile alliances of the North. Yet now, before this golden apparition, his heart stuttered, recognizing an echo of the old prophecies. The Pathfinder, the one who would illuminate paths long buried in snow and shadow. Slowly, he rose, his deep blue eyes meeting the amber blaze of hers without flinching. "Rise, wolf of gold," he murmured, voice low and resonant, carrying the timbre of thunder held in check. The moon has spoken. What the elders condemn, the goddess reveals. The words hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in reverence, and the crowd shifted uneasily, murmurs swelling like a gathering storm. Elder Thorn's staff slammed against the stone, his face twisted in outrage. "Blasphemy! This is no true shift. It's sorcery, a trick of the defect. Seize her before she poisons the pack." Guards lunged forward, chains rattling like skeletal warnings, but Dorian's hand shot up, halting them mid-stride. His presence alone was a barrier, the alpha aura rolling from him in waves of tempered steel and sorrow. "Touch her, and you touch the crown's wrath," he growled, the words laced with a melancholy edge, as if the command pained him more than any wound. Karis's wolf form tensed, muscles coiling beneath her glowing coat, instincts warring with the fear that still gripped her core. Who was this king, kneeling before a nobody like her? His scent reached her, rich earth after rain, mingled with the faint copper of old blood and the smoke of distant fires. It stirred something primal, a curiosity laced with dread, pulling at the frayed threads of her isolation. But trust? No, not yet. Kings brought chains as often as crowns. The square erupted then, not in violence, but in chaos, a tide of bodies pressing in, some dropping to their knees in sudden piety, others snarling accusations that Dorian's betas quelled with drawn blades. Thorn spat curses, invoking ancient laws against abominations, but the king's gaze never left Karis. "You are no defect," he said softly, stepping closer, his boot crunching on a forgotten stone. "I see it in you, the light that defies the dark. Come with me, before this place devours what it cannot understand." His voice carried a plea beneath the command, the guilt in his eyes mirroring her own shame, as if he too knew the sting of being misjudged by blood-bound kin. She backed away, golden tail low, the pull between them instinctive, a magnetic hum in her veins, like the moon's call amplified. Yet denial surged, hot and fierce. This was no fairy tale. Kings did not redeem the broken. They used them. Her mind flashed to the years of scorn, the hut's cold hearth where her mother's whispers had faded into silence. Fear won, and with a bound that blurred the line between wolf and wind, she bolted from the square, weaving through the encircling pines where shadows swallowed the torchlight. Howls rose in pursuit, Thorn's guards, the crowd's frenzy, but Dorian's roar cut through, commanding stillness. He pursued alone, his cloak billowing like raven wings, driven by a compulsion he could not name. The forest claimed her, branches whipping against her fur as she plunged deeper into the mountain's frozen embrace. Snow began to fall, fat flakes that muffled the world in white silence, each one a veil over her racing heart. The golden light of her form dimmed slightly in the canopy's gloom, but it guided her to a narrow ravine where icy waters rushed over jagged rocks, their roar a counterpoint to her labored breaths. She collapsed there, shifting back in a haze of pain, her human body curling naked and shivering against the damp earth. The transformation had drained her, leaving bruises blooming like dark flowers on her skin and tears that froze on her lashes. What was she now? Monster. Savior. The moon watched impassively from above, its silver disk fractured by bare branches. Footsteps crunched behind her, deliberate, unhurried. Dorian emerged from the tree line, his silhouette framed by the ravine's mouth, steam rising from his breath in the sub-zero air. He shrugged off his cloak without a word, draping it over her trembling form, the fur's warmth a shock against her chilled skin. Up close, the scars on his hands were visible, silvered lines from battles he wore like unspoken confessions. "You run from revelation as I once ran from mine," he said, settling on a nearby boulder, giving her space yet anchoring the night with his presence. "But the gold in your blood calls to the curse in mine. Greystone will hunt you now, branded as witch, Stay in these woods alone, and winter will claim what the elders could not. Karis pulled the cloak tighter, its scent enveloping her, safety laced with sorrow. Curiosity flickered, despite the fear knotting her gut. His eyes held no hunger for power, only a weary seeking. "Why kneel?" she whispered, voice raw from the shift's toll. "A king before an Omega's ghost?" He looked away, toward the rushing water, where moonlight danced like fleeting spirits. "Because strength is not in crowns or claws, but in remembering what we were meant to be. I have forgotten too long." The words hung between them, a bridge of shared fracture, born not of desire, but of the raw curiosity that fear could not fully quench. Yet she turned her face to the snow, resisting the pull, as the wind carried distant weavos, hunters closing in, and with them, the inexorable tide of destiny. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The ravine's icy breath clawed at Karis's skin, seeping through the heavy fur of Dorian's cloak like fingers of doubt probing her resolve. She huddled against the damp rock, the cloak's weight a reluctant anchor, its scent, aged leather, and the faint, acrid bite of hearth smoke, wrapping around her like an unwelcome promise. Snowflakes drifted down in lazy spirals, catching in her tangled hair, each one a fragile mirror to the turmoil churning within. The distant weavos sharpened, no longer echoes but harbingers, slicing through the night's veil as Greystone's hunters closed the noose. Thorn's men, relentless in their zeal, driven by the Elder's venomous decree. The golden abomination must burn before it tainted the pack's sacred blood. Dorian's gaze flicked to the tree line, his body tensing with the coiled grace of a predator, long schooled in survival. Scars etched his forearms like maps of forgotten campaigns, visible now as he rolled back a sleeve to test the wind's direction. "They come for you," he said, voice a low rumble that vibrated against the water's roar. "But they'll find me in their path. We move. Now." There was no command in his tone, only the quiet certainty of one who had stared down armies and lived with the ghosts of the fallen. Guilt shadowed his features, a perpetual twilight in those haunted blue eyes, as if protecting her stirred the embers of debts unpaid. Karis pushed to her feet, the cloak dragging like chains, her bare legs prickling with cold that burrowed deeper than flesh. Fear gnawed at her edges, sharp as the rocks underfoot, but beneath it flickered something new, curiosity, threading through the terror like gold veins in stone. Why did this king, etched with the wear of crowns and curses, stand as shield for a girl the world had deemed worthless? She met his eyes, amber remnants of her wolf's fire lingering in her human gaze. "You owe me nothing," she whispered, breath clouding the air between them. "Run alone, let them take the defect." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, melancholy as winter's first frost. "And leave the moon's chosen to the wolves?" "No, Karis Loon. Your light calls to the shadows I've carried too long." He extended a hand, calloused and steady, not grasping but offering, a bridge across the chasm of her isolation. The pull was there, instinctive, a hum in her blood that warred with the walls she'd built from years of scorn. She hesitated, the weavos swelling like a chorus of judgment, then placed her palm in his. His touch was warm, surprisingly so, a spark against the numbness, igniting questions she dared not voice. They fled upstream, the ravine narrowing into a labyrinth of frost-sheathed boulders and overhanging pines that clawed at the sky like desperate prayers. Dorian led with purposeful strides, his boots silent on the snow-dusted path, while Karis followed, the cloak billowing behind her like a banner of borrowed sovereignty. The river's rush masked their steps, but the hunter's calls grew bolder, crashing through underbrush like the pack's unyielding fury. An arrow whistled past, embedding in a trunk with a thud that echoed her pounding heart. Thorns betas, scenting blood and blasphemy. Dorian whirled, shoving her behind a jutting outcrop as he drew a dagger from his belt, its blade gleaming with runes that caught the moonlight like captured stars. "Stay low," he growled, positioning himself as barrier, his broad frame blocking the ravine's mouth. Two hunters burst into view, cloaked in gray, eyes wild with the thrill of the chase. The first lunged, fangs bared in partial shift, but Dorian met him with a fluid strike, blade slicing furred shoulder, drawing a spray of crimson that steamed on the snow. The second circled, snarling accusations. "Witch's consort. The elder demands her head." Karis pressed against the rock, heart thundering, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the river's mist. She could shift, unleash the gold once more, but the memory of the square's agony held her back, a beast unchained, yet leashed by fear of what it might consume. Instead, she watched Dorian fight, not with the brute rage of alphas she'd feared, but with a measured sorrow, each parry a deflection of his own regrets. He disarmed the second hunter with a twist that sent the man sprawling into the shallows, then pinned him with a boot, blue eyes cold as glacial depths. "Tell Thorn the king's mercy spares you this night, but hunt her again, and the north remembers no kin." The hunter spat defiance, but scrambled away, dragging his wounded comrade into the shadows. Dorian sheathed his blade, breath ragged, a fresh cut weeping blood down his arm. Warm rivulets that stained the snow like accusations from the earth. Karis emerged, drawn by the vulnerability in his stance, the way pain etched deeper lines into his face. Without thinking, she tore a strip from the cloak's hem, pressing it to his wound. Her fingers trembled against his skin, the contact electric, stirring empathy from the ashes of her caution. "You bleed for a stranger," she said softly, tying the makeshift bandage with hands still chilled from exile. "What curse binds a king to such folly?" He covered her hand with his, the gesture lingering, his touch a quiet storm of shared wounds. Not curse, but echo. "I've shattered lives for duty, packs divided, a queen's light dimmed by my ambition. Seeing you. It reminds me mercy is the true throne." His voice cracked, raw with the weight of confessions unspoken, and in that moment the bond flickered to life, not fire, but a steady glow born of mutual fracture. The wind howled approval, carrying the scent of pine and possibility as they pressed on, the ravine opening to a hidden cave mouth veiled by icicles like frozen tears. Inside, the space was a sanctuary of stone and shadow, a faint, hot spring bubbling at its heart, steam rising in ethereal curls that caught the moon's intrusion through a high crevice. Dorian kindled a small fire with flint from his pouch, flames dancing like hesitant spirits, casting golden flickers across the walls, mirroring the wolf that slumbered in her veins. They sat in silence at first, the warmth thawing the ice between them. Karis unwrapped the cloak slightly, sharing its heat, her body aching from the flight, but her spirit stirring. He spoke then, in measured tones, of his curse, a mark from a betrayed ally, binding his shifts to nights of blood moon, a reminder of power's cost. She listened, sharing fragments of her own, the father's grave unmarked, the mother's faded songs, the square's jeers that had hollowed her soul. Empathy wove through their words, turning curiosity to connection, fragile as the steam veiling their faces. Yet doubt lingered in her eyes. The bond resisted, rationalized as survival's illusion. Outside, the weavos faded, but the night whispered of trials yet to come, enemies common, fates entwined. As the fire crackled, Karis traced a scar on her palm, the golden light within her pulsing faintly, a symbol awakening. Not dominance, but the quiet power of remembrance, binding broken souls under the moon's unyielding watch. What was refuge, if not the choice to trust the shadows in another. The cave's steam-wreathed heart pulsed like a hidden vein, the hot springs' murmur weaving through the silence as if the earth itself whispered secrets long buried. Karis sat cross-legged on the rough-hewn floor, the fire's glow painting her skin in strokes of amber and shadow, chasing away the ravine's chill, but not the deeper frost of uncertainty. Dorian's cloak lay draped across her shoulders, its fur matted with snowmelt and the faint rust of his blood, a tangible thread binding their flight. She traced the golden pulse in her veins, faint now in human form, like embers banked against dawn, a light that had shattered her world in the square, yet left her adrift in its wake. What gift was this, if it invited only pursuit and peril? The air carried the mineral tang of the spring, mingled with the wood smoke's bite, and beyond the icicle-veiled entrance, the wind's low moan hinted at the night's unslumbering watch. Dorian knelt by the fire, adding a twist of pine branch that crackled and spat, sparks ascending like fleeting prayers to the moon's sliver peeking through the crevice above. His bandaged arm rested heavy on his knee, the wound's ache a dull echo in his frame. But his eyes, those deep, storm-tossed blues, fixed on her with an intensity that peeled back her defenses. 45 years had honed him into a bastion of quiet command, yet guilt etched every line, a crown of thorns from choices that echoed in his solitude. He had spoken of his curse in fragments earlier, the blood moon's bind that twisted his shifts into tempests of rage and remorse, a relic from a war where he had traded a lover's life for the throne's iron grip. Now, watching her, he felt the fracture widen, as if her presence stirred the prophecy's dormant fire. The Pathfinder, the golden light to guide lost kings from shadow's maw. "You carry it still," he said, voice a gravelly cadence that cut through the steam's haze, gesturing to her hand where the light flickered unbidden. "The gold. It's no mere shift, Karis. I've read the ancient scrolls in Vael's frozen halls, tales of the goddesses chosen, born to illuminate paths obscured by betrayal. But none spoke of one so overlooked." Melancholy laced his words, a king's confession to the unworthy, his gaze dropping to the flames as if they held the faces of those he'd failed. She drew her knees closer, the stone's chill seeping through despite the fire's reach, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. Empathy had bloomed in the refuge's quiet, turning his scars into mirrors of her own. But revelation? It terrified her more than thorns' chains. "Overlooked is kind," she murmured, voice threaded with the raw edge of old wounds. "I was the pack's jest, the Omega who couldn't summon fang or fur. If this is destiny, it's cruel, unleashing me in scorn, not sanctuary." The golden light stirred again, responding to her doubt, blooming brighter along her fingertips, casting the cave in a warm, otherworldly sheen that danced across the walls like liquid sunlight. She gasped, pulling her hand back, but it lingered, weaving through the air like threads of fate, illuminating runes etched into the cave's stone, symbols she had never seen, yet felt in her bones. A wolf encircled by thorns, a crown pierced by light. Dorian's breath caught, his body going still as the light touched him, tracing the curse mark on his collarbone, a jagged scar hidden beneath his tunic, pulsing black against his skin. The gold enveloped it, not burning but soothing, drawing a low groan from his throat as visions assailed him. Fragmented memories of his queen's final breath, her eyes accusing under a blood moon, packs rent asunder by his decrees, a path forward, veiled in snow, where mercy mended what war had torn. He staggered to his feet, blue eyes widening with recognition, the melancholy fracturing into awe. "By the goddess," he whispered, reaching out as if to grasp the light, his fingers brushing hers in a contact that sent sparks racing up her arm. "You are the key, the Pathfinder unbound. This curse, it twists me, binds my soul to endless night. But your light, it reveals the way out, not through conquest, but through what I've forsaken. Redemption's quiet flame. Karis recoiled, the light flaring in response, illuminating the cave's depths where the spring bubbled clearer, steam parting to reveal a submerged carving, a golden wolf drinking from lunar waters, symbol of the one who would heal the king's shadowed hearts. Fear coiled tight in her chest, the wind outside rising to a howl that rattled the icicles like chimes of warning. This manifestation was no accident. It was her essence awakening, the hidden gift that had slumbered through years of rejection, now demanding she embrace it. Yet the pull toward him intensified, a spiritual tether that resonated with the moon's distant call, stirring her wolf's instincts to protect, to guide. "I don't want this," she said, voice breaking on the edge of tears that froze on her lashes. "To be key to a king's fate? What if I shatter you as they shattered me?" Her words hung heavy, philosophy woven into pain. What was strength, if not choosing to illuminate the dark despite the cost? He stepped closer, the space between them charged, his hand cupping her cheek with a tenderness born of shared revelation. The touch grounded her, the gold light softening to a steady glow that bathed them both, easing the curse's throb in his veins. "Then we shatter together," he replied, voice resonant with the weight of destiny's hand. "I've knelt to crowns of blood and bone, but to you, to this light, I would bow eternally. The North's wars rage on, traitors whispering in the shadows of my court. If you are the remembrance I need, let me walk your path." The bond deepened, resisted no longer, but accepted in fragments, her curiosity yielding to a profound connection, tragic and redemptive under the moon's gaze. Outside, the howls drew nearer, not just hunters, but something darker, scouts from rival packs, scenting the disturbance like wolves to a fresh kill. The revelation hung between them, a turning point etched in gold and shadow as Karis felt the Pathfinder's full weight. Not power to wield, but a moral compass to forge ahead, binding her fate to his in the dance of redemption. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your... The cave's golden afterglow lingered like a half-remembered dream, the light from Karis's veins fading into the steam's ethereal veil, leaving only the fire's steady crackle and the spring's insistent murmur. She pulled away from Dorian's touch, her cheek still warm where his palm had rested, a brand of possibility that both soothed and scorched. The Pathfinder's awakening thrummed in her blood now, no longer a flicker, but a current, pulling her toward truths she had buried under layers of shame. Outside, the howls multiplied, a cacophony of rival scents threading through the wind, not just Greystone's zealots, but intruders from the shadowed fringes of the north, alphas whose packs Dorian had subdued in blood-soaked treaties. Traitors, perhaps, or opportunists drawn by the disturbance's ripple, sensing weakness in a king's unguarded vigil. Karis rose, the stone floor gritty beneath her feet, her body aching from the revelation's toll, muscles taut as bowstrings, skin prickling with the cave's humid chill. The cloak slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet like shed inhibitions, and she faced him, amber eyes hardening with the resolve of one who had learned survival in silence. "If I'm this..." "Key," she said, voice steady, despite the tremor in her core. "Then hiding solves nothing. They come because of me, because of what you saw in the square. Face them with me, or let me go. Freedom isn't chains, even golden ones." Philosophy edged her words, sharp as the icicles framing the entrance. What was destiny, if not the freedom to choose its cost? Love's pull tugged at her, a redemptive whisper against the isolation that had defined her, but she resisted its full embrace, rationalizing it as alliance born of necessity, not the deeper yearning stirring in her chest. Dorian's face tightened, the curse mark on his collarbone pulsing faintly black beneath his tunic, a reminder of shadows her light had briefly pierced. He nodded once, melancholy etching deeper furrows around his eyes, the weight of his crown a visible burden in the slump of his broad shoulders. The past hunts us both, Karis. Greystone's elders, my old rivals, they'll twist this revelation into war. But if we run, we gift them victory. Stand with me. His voice carried the gravel of battles won at too high a price, guilt threading through like veins of ore in stone. He offered his hand again, not as king, but as equal, scarred palm upturned in the firelight. And this time she took it without hesitation, the contact igniting a spark that traveled her spine. Instinctive, undeniable, yet she armored her heart against its warmth. They emerged into the night, the moon's disk swollen and accusatory overhead, casting the ravine's mouth in stark silver. Snow crunched underfoot, fresh flakes swirling in eddies that stung like accusations, the air thick with the musk of encroaching foes. The howls converged, figures materializing from the tree line. Thorn at the fore. His gray robes muddied, staff raised like a scepter of judgment, flanked by greystone betas with chains and torches. But beyond them slunk darker shapes, wolves from the Ironfang clan, rivals Dorian had bested a decade past, led by Alpha Riven, a hulking brute whose pelt bore the scars of that defeat, eyes gleaming with vengeful fire. Riven's betrayal lingered in the North's lore, a turncoat who had sold secrets for power, only to be exiled, now circling like a scavenger scenting a fallen throne. Thorn's voice boomed first, echoing off the ravine's walls like thunder in a chalice. Abomination! The goddess abhors your sorcery. Yield, and we'll end it swiftly, before the traitor's kin claim the spoils. His gaze flicked to Riven, a uneasy alliance forged in mutual hatred, the elder's face twisted with the zeal of one who saw heresy in every shadow. Riven snarled, shifting partially, fangs elongating in the moonlight, his pack fanning out to encircle the ravine. The king kneels to defects now? Vael, your curse weakens you. Hand her over, and I'll spare your realm another war, for old time's sake. The words dripped venom, stirring Dorian's guilt like a blade in old wounds. Riven had been his brother in arms once, before ambition fractured their bond, before Dorian's decrees left Riven's mate broken on a battlefield. Dorian stepped forward, positioning himself between Karis and the throng, his aura flaring, a tempered storm of alpha command laced with sorrow. This ends no wars, Riven. You've chased ghosts long enough. Thorn, your pack's fear blinds you to the moon's truth. But the elder lunged, staff swinging in an arc that whistled through the air, and chaos erupted. Betas charged, chains rattling like skeletal laughter, while Ironfang wolves bounded in, fur rippling under the moon's gaze. Dorian met the fray with fluid precision, his dagger flashing to parry a claw swipe. Blood spraying hot and red against the snow, his own, mingling with a beta's as he felled the man with a sorrowful strike. Karis's heart pounded, the metallic tang flooding her senses, wind whipping her hair like a banner of defiance. Instinct surged, her body igniting without choice, the golden light erupting as she shifted, the wolf form blazing forth, taller and more radiant than in the square, its coat a beacon that pierced the night. She leaped into the melee, not with rage but purpose, golden paws slamming a Ironfang scout aside, her rumble a resonant call that scattered lesser foes. Claws raked her flank, drawing crimson lines that burned like fire on ice. But she pressed on, amber eyes locking with Riven's as he shifted fully, a massive black brute lunging for Dorian's back. She intercepted, bodies colliding in a visceral clash, fur against fur, the impact jarring her bones, blood and breath mingling in the frozen air. Riven's jaws snapped inches from her throat, his growl a torrent of betrayal. "Golden witch, you'll drag us all to ruin." Dorian whirled, shoving Riven off her with a roar that shook the pines, the two alphas grappling in a whirlwind of fangs and fists. Old wounds reopening in literal crimson. Thorn circled, chanting condemnations, his staff aimed at Karis's exposed side. Pain lanced through her, not just physical, but the echo of her past, the square's jeers, her father's unmarked grave, the pack's rejection crashing like waves. In that crucible, choice crystallized: forgive the kin who had shamed her, or unleash the gold as weapon, damning them to war's maw. Mercy warred with freedom, love's redemptive pull anchoring her to Dorian's side, even as liberty screamed to flee into the wilds. She could end it, shift fully, overwhelm them with the ancient light. But what strength was there in domination when compassion might forge a truer path? With a bound, she placed herself between Thorn and Dorian, golden form shielding the king as his blade found Riven's shoulder, forcing the rival back. The elder halted, staff trembling, eyes widening at the light that bathed him, not destroying, but revealing. Visions of his own failures flickering in the glow, lost pups and broken rights. The pack faltered, howls turning to whimpers, the wind carrying a hush as profound as the moon's silence. Karis's wolf form held, blood dripping from her wounds to stain the snow in patterns like prophetic runes. Her gaze a moral crossroads: pardon or perish, union or exile. Dorian met her eyes mid-fight, blue depths pleading for the choice that might redeem them both, the air thick with the philosophy of blood and bone. What was power, if not the mercy to spare the hand that scarred you? The confrontation hung suspended, enemies poised on the edge of rout or reckoning, as Karis's light pulsed brighter, illuminating the dilemma's spiritual core. To bind her fate to his forgiveness, or sever it in solitary flame under the unrelenting lunar witness. The snow-laden wind howled through the ravine like a lament for choices unmade, whipping flakes into a blinding veil that blurred the line between foe and shadow. Karis's golden form stood resolute, her radiant pelt a defiant torch against the encroaching dark, blood from her flank tracing warm rivulets down her fur to pool on the frost-cracked earth. The metallic scent mingled with the pine's sharp resin and the acrid bite of fierce sweat from the encircling pack, a visceral tapestry that clawed at her senses. Her amber eyes swept the fray, Thorn's betas frozen mid-lunge, chains dangling limp. Riven's iron-fang wolves hackled and snarling, their black coats absorbing the moonlight like voids hungry for her light. Dorian panted beside her, his tunic torn and bloodied, the curse mark on his collarbone throbbing visibly now, a black vein pulsing against the gold's encroaching glow. In her wolf's mind, the world sharpened to instincts and echoes, the square's jeers resurfacing as phantom stings, her mother's faded lullabies whispering of mercy's hidden strength, Dorian's haunted gaze anchoring her like a lodestar in the storm. The Pathfinder's gift surged unbidden, not as weapon, but illuminator, casting beams that pierced the chaos, revealing truths etched in light. On Thorn's face, it unveiled regrets. A daughter's exile years past, condemned by his own rigid rights, her bones lost to the mountains. The elder staggered, staff clattering to the snow, his condemnation fracturing into a choked whisper. What sorcery is this? But his eyes, wide with unwelcome clarity, betrayed the moral quake. Had his zeal birthed the very abomination he hunted? Riven lunged again, undeterred, his massive frame barreling through the light like a shadow defying dawn, jaws snapping toward Karis's throat. She met him not with fury, but a sidestep that channeled her ancient essence, golden paws pressing the earth, sending a ripple of luminescence that seared his pelt without touch, forcing him back with a yelp that echoed his betrayal's cost. Dorian seized the opening, tackling the rival alpha into the snow, their bodies a tangle of muscle and memory. Fists flew, claws raking, Riven's strike drawing fresh blood from Dorian's side, crimson blooming like poppies on white fields. "You took everything!" Riven snarled, voice muffled in partial shift. The words a guttural accusation born of that long-ago war, where Dorian's strategy had claimed Riven's mate, leaving the Iron Fang pack fractured and vengeful. Karis circled them, her wolf's heart pounding a rhythm of dilemma. Intervene and crush, unleashing the gold's full might to end the threat, or hold back, letting the light expose the rot of old grudges. Freedom tempted her, to bolt into the wilds, severing ties to pack and king alike, reclaiming solitude as armor. Yet the bond with Dorian pulled, redemptive and insistent, his pain mirroring her own rejection's scar. What was love, if not the proof that demanded sacrifice over slaughter? She shifted partially, human voice emerging through the rumble. Enough, see what you've wrought. The light intensified, bathing Riven in visions, his mate's final gaze, not blame, but plea for peace. The packs he could have united instead poisoned by his grudge. The brute faltered, jaws slackening, the fight draining from his frame as Dorian pinned him, blade at his throat. Thorn's betas whimpered, dropping weapons, the chains coiling like defeated serpents in the snow. The elder sank to his knees, the gold revealing his soul's barren throne, power hoarded through fear, leaving Greystone hollow. "Forgive, or curse us all," he rasped, the words a bridge from judgment to plea, his face crumpling under the weight of truths long denied. Karis's light dimmed slightly, the effort tolling her, muscles quivering, wounds weeping warmer now, the cold seeping in like despair's whisper. She fully shifted back, naked and trembling in the storm's heart, the transformation's reversal leaving her skin etched with golden veins that faded like dying embers. Dorian rose, releasing Riven with a shove that sent the rival sprawling, his blue eyes meeting hers across the bloodied snow. Gratitude laced with sorrow. The curse mark quieting under her influence, a tentative healing in its pulse. The packs held, breaths ragged in the sudden hush, the wind's howl softening to a mournful sigh, as if the moon itself exhaled. Riven pushed to his feet, scarred pelt matted, eyes flickering between hatred and revelation. "This changes nothing, Vale. Your throne's built on bones like mine." But the venom faltered, the light's echo lingering in his gaze, planting seeds of doubt in vengeance's soil. Thorn crawled forward, grasping at her feet, his voice a broken chant. "We were blind, Omega! No, Pathfinder! Spare us your flame!" The moral crossroads loomed, Karis's chest tight with the philosophy of it all. Power as compassion, not conquest, forgiveness as the ultimate freedom, weaving rejection into renascence. To pardon meant binding her fate to theirs, to Dorian's side, his guilt's redemption her own proof of worth. To war meant liberty's cold embrace, eternal exile under solitary moons. She knelt before Thorn, the snow biting her knees, and placed a hand on his brow, the gold flickering once more, not to punish but to seal understanding, a spiritual pact etched in light and tear. "Rise," she said, voice resonant with the weight of choice, "and remember, strength kneels to mercy, not might." The elder nodded, tears carving paths through frost on his cheeks, and the betas followed, their howls shifting from hunt to homage. Riven hesitated, then turned, his pack melting into the tree line, not in defeat, but retreat, the seeds of alliance sown in reluctant soil. Dorian approached, wrapping his cloak around her once more, his touch lingering on her shoulder, a union forged in the crucible, resisted no longer but embraced as destiny's quiet vow. Yet as the ravine emptied, leaving only bloodied snow and the moon's impartial watch, doubt gnawed at Karis's edges. Had mercy crowned them, or merely delayed the storm? The bond with Dorian deepened, a redemptive flame against her isolation, but the choice's echo whispered, what sacrifice would true healing demand when kings and omegas alike bore scars that bled eternal? The night closed in, heavy with the spiritual hush of paths illuminated, yet shadowed by the renascence yet to fully bloom. The ravine's hush deepened into a profound stillness, the snow settling like a shroud over the bloodied imprints of the fray, each flake a silent witness to the fragile truce Karis had forged. Her bare skin prickled under Dorian's cloak, the fur's warmth a deceptive comfort against the wind's lingering bite, carrying the faint, coppery echo of spilled blood and the distant fading howls of retreating packs. She stood at the ravine's edge, the moon's bloated gaze pressing down, its silver light fracturing on the icicles that dangled like frozen regrets from the overhanging pines. The golden veins in her arms pulsed faintly now, a receding tide after the revelation's storm, leaving her hollowed, body bruised, spirit teetering on the brink of rebirth or ruin. Dorian's presence anchored her, his broad frame close but not crowding, the scent of his sweat and old scars mingling with the mineral tang of the nearby spring. He had bound his wounds with strips torn from his own tunic, the fabric dark with crimson, his blue eyes shadowed by the melancholy that clung to him like frost. The curse mark on his collarbone lay quiescent under her light's touch, but she felt its undercurrent, a dark throb that mirrored the doubt gnawing at her core. Mercy had spared thorn and scattered riven, illuminating their fractures without shattering them further, yet the choice echoed in her bones. Had she chosen union, binding her light to his shadows, or merely delayed the inevitable bleed of old wounds? Love, she realized, was no gentle crown. It demanded sacrifice, the yielding of self to mend what rejection had torn asunder. "The packs withdraw," Dorian murmured, his voice a low rumble that cut through the wind's whisper. "But the North's heart stirs. Whispers of the golden wolf will spread like wildfire through the frozen halls, alliances tested, traitors emboldened. My court in Vile's spires waits, riddled with those who covet the throne I've stained with guilt." He turned to her, the fire's dying embers from the cave reflecting in his gaze, turning the blue to molten sorrow. At 45, he bore the realm's weight not as glory, but as penance. The queen's ghost in every decree, the blood moons that twisted his shifts into solitary agonies. Her light had pierced that veil, offering a path to cure. But he saw the cost in her eyes. To walk, it meant her exile ending in entanglement, her freedom bartered for his redemption. Karis's breath clouded the air, her fingers tracing the cloak's edge where his blood had soaked through, warm and sticky against her skin. The Pathfinder's essence hummed within, no longer a stranger but a companion, urging her toward the moral precipice. Compassion had stayed her claws in the fight, revealing truths that humbled foes without conquest, yet true healing required more, a deliberate offering, her light poured into his curse like wine into a chalice, risking its dimming in the shadows it sought to banish. "You've knelt to me twice now," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, the wind tugging at her hair like insistent fingers. "Once in the square, once in the cave. But kings rise, Dorian. What if my gold blinds you to the blade at your back? I chose mercy for them, Thorn's blindness, Riven's grudge, but for us. What sacrifice does the moon demand?" He stepped closer, the space between them charged with the night's electric hush, his hand lifting to brush a snowflake from her lash. The touch ignited the bond fully, no longer resisted or rationalized, but accepted as the redemptive proof it was, a union born of shared exile, her rejection mirroring his guilt's isolation. "The sacrifice is mine to bear," he replied, his tone laced with the tragic depth of one who had lost too much to power's grasp. "I forged empires on betrayal, left souls like yours to the cold. Let your light cure this mark. Bind it, if you must, to my oath. Not as Omega to King, but as equals under the goddess's eye. Walk with me to Viel, or turn away. But know this, redemption is no reward, Karis. It's the choice to bleed for the light in another." The words hung heavy, philosophy woven into the wind's sigh, as distant uivos rose once more. Not pursuit, but a chorus from the peaks, the moon's spiritual affirmation stirring her wolf's blood. She felt the pull of liberty, the wilds calling her to solitary moons where no pack could scorn, no crown could claim. Yet the deeper truth bloomed. Rebirth lay not in flight, but in this yielding, the golden wolf's ancient purpose. To guide the fallen king through his shadows, her light sacrificing isolation for the warmth of union. Tears welled, hot against the cold, tracing paths that mirrored the bloodied snow at their feet. With a breath that steadied her soul, she placed her palm over his chest, where the curse pulsed like a wounded heart. The gold ignited, surging from her veins in a radiant flood, enveloping the mark in ethereal fire, not consuming, but merging, threads of light weaving into darkness until the black scar softened to silver, the throb easing into a quiet hum of renewal. Dorian gasped, knees buckling as visions assailed him. Paths illuminated through snow-veiled mountains, packs united not by fang, but forgiveness. His queen's spirit smiling from lunar mists, absolved in the act of his surrender. The cure took hold, his shifts unbound from Blood Moon's rage, replaced by a balanced strength tempered by her essence. Pain lanced through Karis, the light's outpouring draining her like a river to the sea, her form shimmering, golden veins fading to a subtle glow, the wolf's power shared, diminished yet enduring. She collapsed against him, his arms encircling her in an embrace that was both cure and vow, their breaths mingling in the frozen air, the wind's howl softening to a benediction. As dawn's first blush crept over the peaks, tinting the snow in hues of rose and gold, they rose together. Karis cloaked in his fur and his promise, Dorian's hand firm in hers. The ravine, once a crucible of confrontation, stretched empty before them, a path leading toward Vale's distant spires where trials awaited, but no longer alone. Rejection had birthed this, her shame transmuted to sovereignty, his guilt to grace. Under the waning moon, they stepped forward, the union a redemptive flame against the North's endless winter. Sacrifice sealed, rebirth claimed, love's proof etched in blood and light eternal. The night exhaled its final breath, the stars winking out like embers in the coming day, leaving only the echo of howls that now sang of remembrance, not ruin. In that spiritual hush, Karis felt the goddess's whisper. Strength was mercy's quiet throne, and in choosing it, they had crowned each other anew. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.